Jed was a man who loved quiet. He loved the whisper of the wind through tall trees and the gentle gurgle of a hidden stream. That's why he decided to build his own small cabin way out in the deep woods, far from noisy towns and other people. He chose a spot that felt just right, nestled between a grove of old oak trees and a winding river. It took him many weeks of hard work, chopping wood and hauling logs, but Jed didn't mind. Every swing of his axe, every nail hammered, brought him closer to the peaceful life he dreamed of. His cabin wasn't big, just one room with a small fireplace and a comfy bed. The windows looked out onto a sea of green leaves in the summer and sparkling white snow in the winter. From his porch, he could hear birds singing their morning songs and sometimes the hoot of an owl at night. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. Jed felt a deep happiness living there. He spent his days exploring the forest, fishing in the river, and reading old books by the warmth of his fire. He cooked simple meals, mostly what he caught or grew in a tiny garden patch he started. He learned the ways of the woods, how to tell when a storm was coming and where the best berry bushes grew. He knew the paths deer took and the sound of a fox trotting through the underbrush. Being alone in nature wasn't lonely for Jed. It was exactly where he felt he belonged. He liked the challenge of living simply, relying on himself and the land around him. This cabin was more than just a house. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could truly be himself, surrounded by the wild beauty he cherished so much. He never once thought he might not be as alone as he felt. Jed's peaceful life in his cabin continued for many months, each day a new chance to enjoy the forest. But slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first, small changes began to happen around his home. They weren't big, scary changes, just odd little things that made Jed pause and scratch his head. One morning, as he walked to the river to get water, he saw it. A thick branch, too sturdy for any animal to break, lay across his path. But it wasn't just broken. It looked twisted, almost snapped with great force in a very unusual way. Jed picked it up, feeling its rough bark, and couldn't figure out how it had happened. A strong gust of wind? Perhaps, but it seemed too neat, too deliberate. He shrugged and tossed it aside, thinking little of it. A few days later, while gathering firewood near his cabin, Jed found something even stranger. There, at the base of a big pine tree, was a small pile of rocks. Not just any rocks, but smooth, gray stones stacked carefully, one on top of the other, forming a tiny tower. He knew he hadn't put them there, and no animal he knew would stack rocks. He nudged the pile with his boot, and it tumbled down. Must be kids playing a trick, he mumbled, even though he knew there were no kids for miles around. The strange occurrences kept happening. Another broken branch, this time pushed right up against his cabin wall. Another stack of rocks, this time near his vegetable garden. Sometimes he'd find a fallen log that looked like it had been moved just a little, or a patch of leaves disturbed in a way that didn't seem natural. Jed started to pay more attention, his eyes scanning the woods around his cabin with a new curiosity. He still loved his quiet life. But now, a tiny question mark hung in the air. What was going on? And who or what was doing these odd things? The strange broken branches and carefully stacked rocks had certainly made Jed think. He kept a closer eye on his surroundings, but the odd happenings seemed to stop for a while. He almost forgot about them, settling back into his peaceful routine of fishing, reading, and enjoying the forest. Then, one crisp autumn morning, something happened that made his jaw drop. Jed stepped out onto his small porch, coffee mug in hand, ready to greet the day. His eyes landed on a small object resting right in the middle of the wooden floorboards near his front door. It wasn't a rock or a broken stick. It was a bird. Not a real bird, but a small wooden one, carved with amazing care. Its feathers were smoothly shaped, its tiny beak pointed, and its eyes seemed to gaze out with a silent wisdom. The wood was a rich, dark color, polished smooth as if by many gentle hands. Jed knelt down and picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. It was lighter than he expected, but strong. He ran his thumb over its smooth back, feeling the tiny grooves that marked its wings. This was no rough whittling. This was a piece of art. Someone had spent a lot of time and skill making this. But who? Jed was miles from anyone. No one ever came to his cabin unless he invited them, and he hadn't had a visitor in months. There were no tracks in the dew-kissed grass leading up to his porch, no sign of anyone at all. It was as if the little wooden bird had simply appeared out of thin air. He stared at the forest edge, then back at his cabin, a knot of wonder and a tiny bit of worry twisting in his stomach. Was this connected to the strange branches and rock piles? Was someone watching him? It wasn't a scary thought, not really, but it was certainly a puzzling one. He brought the little bird inside, setting it carefully on his mantelpiece, a constant reminder of the mystery now living around his secluded home. The little wooden bird sat on Jed's mantel, a silent question mark in his peaceful home. He often glanced at it, wondering about its maker. The mystery deepened quickly. Just a few days after finding the bird, Jed stepped outside and found a small, neatly woven basket resting on his porch railing. Inside were plump, dark berries, perfectly ripe and clean. He knew these berries. They grew deeper in the forest, places he didn't often go. This wasn't just a random act. Someone knew what he might like, or at least what was good to eat. Jed tried to tell himself it was a friendly animal, perhaps a clever squirrel, but the woven basket was too intricate. It was clearly made by hands, clever hands at that. He ate the berries, which were sweet and delicious, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and growing curiosity. A week later, a smooth, flat stone appeared by his doorway. It was a beautiful gray color, with faint white lines swirling through it, like a tiny cloud captured forever. It fit perfectly in his palm, cool and comforting to the touch. He added it to his collection of interesting forest finds, but this one felt different. Special. It was clearly chosen, not just stumbled upon. Then came the most surprising gift of all. One morning, tucked beside his chopping block, Jed found a small tool. It was made from bone, carefully shaped into a sturdy, sharp edge, perfect for scraping hides or cutting tough roots. It was strong and useful, showing true skill in its making. This wasn't just a trinket. It was something practical, something someone would use to survive in the wild. Jed held the bone tool, turning it over and over. The wooden bird, the berry basket, the pretty stone, and now this useful tool. These weren't random items. They were gifts, thoughtfully made or chosen, left for him by an unseen presence. He wasn't scared, but a shiver of wonder ran through him. Who was this silent gift giver? And why were they leaving him these things? The quiet of his woods felt less empty now, filled with a new, secret life. The growing collection of gifts on Jed's mantel and shelves, the carved bird, the beautiful stone, the sturdy bone tool, filled his cabin with a new kind of warmth. But with that warmth came a swirling mix of feelings inside him. He felt wonder, like a child discovering magic. but also a tiny tickle of fear, a small shiver that ran down his spine when he thought about it too much. Jed was a smart man who knew the woods well. He knew what a bear could do, what a fox left behind, and what kind of birds nested in which trees. He also knew what people could do. And these gifts, he realized, were not from any human he knew. The nearest town was a long journey away, and no one he knew had the skill to carve that bird or weave that basket in such a natural, wild way. More importantly, no human would sneak around leaving gifts without ever showing themselves. He sat by his fire one evening, turning the smooth gray stone over and over in his hand. It was too perfect, too thoughtful for an animal. But if not an animal, and not a person, then what? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent companion in his cabin. He wasn't afraid in a panicky way, not like he would be if he thought a dangerous animal was lurking. This was a different kind of fear, a fear of the unknown, of something beyond his understanding. Yet, alongside that fear was a powerful sense of wonder. The gifts were kind. They were beautiful. They were useful. Whoever or whatever was leaving them was not trying to hurt him. In fact, it seemed to be trying to help him, or at least show him friendship. The thought of an unseen, intelligent presence in his woods, a presence that offered gifts, filled him with a strange excitement. It was like living in a fairy tale, but a real one, right outside his door. He knew, deep in his gut, that these gifts were special, and that his world in the quiet woods was far more mysterious than he had ever imagined. The feeling of wonder grew stronger in Jed's heart than any fear. He thought about the kind gifts, the cleverness behind them, and the silent way they appeared. It was clear that this unseen friend was reaching out, and Jed felt a strong pull to respond. He decided he would leave a gift back, a way to say thank you, and to show that he too was friendly. But what kind of gift? He needed something simple, something that wouldn't scare his mysterious visitor, but also something unique and special. He rummaged through his cabin, looking at his few possessions. He thought about a shiny fishing lure, but that felt too much like a trap. He considered a carved piece of wood, but his own carving skills were nowhere near as good as the little bird he had received. Finally, his eyes landed on an old tin box where he kept small odds and ends. Inside, glinting softly, was a shiny metal button. It was an old button from a jacket he no longer had, smooth and round, with a pretty pattern on it. It wasn't natural like the other gifts, but it was bright and different, something special from his world. He thought it might catch the eye of his secret friend. Next, he looked for something tasty. He found a small piece of dried fruit, a sweet apricot he had saved from his last trip to town. It was soft and chewy, full of a sweet taste that was hard to find in the wild. He hoped his gift giver would enjoy it. With the button and the fruit in hand, Jed walked out onto his porch. He didn't want to just leave them anywhere. He wanted to place them carefully, just like his gifts had been left for him. He found a flat, mossy stone near his steps, a spot where he often saw deer tracks. He placed the shiny button on top of the stone, letting it catch the sunlight, and then laid the sweet dried fruit beside it. He stepped back, looking at his offering. It felt like a very important moment. He was sending a message into the quiet woods, a message of friendship. "Thank you," he whispered to the trees, "for your kindness." Then he went back inside, his heart thumping a little with excitement, and waited. Jed woke up the next morning with a flutter of excitement in his chest. He had slept restlessly, wondering if his gifts would be taken. As soon as the first rays of sun peeked over the treetops, he got out of bed and hurried to the door, pulling it open quietly. He looked towards the mossy stone where he had left his offerings. His eyes widened slightly. The shiny metal button and the sweet dried fruit were both gone. His heart gave a happy leap. The gifts had been accepted. But that wasn't all. In the very spot where his button had been, a new item lay. It was a flower, a single bloom, unlike any Jed had ever seen in his part of the woods. Its petals were a deep, velvety purple, almost black in places, with tiny specks of silver shimmering at its center. It looked delicate, yet it was perfectly fresh, as if it had just been picked that very moment. Jed knelt down, his fingers gently touching the soft petals. The flower smelled faintly sweet, like wild honey and damp earth. This wasn't just a random wildflower. This was a special bloom, carefully chosen and placed. It was another gift, a beautiful reply to his own. A powerful realization washed over Jed as he held the unique flower. His gifts had been taken, and a new one left in return, all in the quiet hours of the night. This meant his mysterious friend was not only nearby but also very aware of him. This creature, whatever it was, knew when Jed slept and when he was awake. It had watched him place his gifts and then approached when he was safely inside. He felt a tingle of nerves, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of awe. Someone or something was watching him. Yes, but not in a bad way. It was a watchful, gentle presence, one that understood the meaning of a gift and wanted to give one back. The exchange felt like a secret handshake, a silent agreement of friendship. His world, once so solitary, now held a deep, fascinating secret. The forest was truly alive with more than just animals. The beautiful purple flower now sat beside the wooden bird on Jed's mantle, a symbol of the growing, silent friendship. The knowledge that he was being watched, not in a scary way, but a kind one, changed how Jed felt about his evenings. Before, the nights were just quiet. Now, they were full of listening. He started to hear new sounds after the sun went down. Soft thumps. Not the light patter of a deer or the quick scurrying of a squirrel. These were heavier, deeper thumps, like something big but careful moving through the forest floor. They weren't loud enough to shake his cabin, but Jed, with his sharp woodsman's ears, could pick them out from the usual night noises. Sometimes he'd hear a distinct rustle in the leaves right outside his window, a sound that lasted longer than an animal simply passing by. It was like something was pausing, perhaps looking in or just listening. He would hold his breath, his heart beating a little faster, but he never felt fear. It was more like an exciting secret, a game of hide and seek where he was always it. One night, he heard a series of soft knocks, almost like a rhythm, coming from the back of his cabin, near where the gifts sometimes appeared. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't a branch falling. It sounded like something tapping gently on the wood. He lay in bed, wide awake, trying to imagine what kind of creature would make such a sound. It was too big for a bird, too steady for a raccoon. These sounds weren't constant. They came and went, sometimes for a few nights in a row, then silence for a week. But each time, they reminded Jed that he wasn't truly alone. These weren't the sounds of bears or wolves, animals he knew well. These were different. They were the sounds of something large, yes, but also something quiet, thoughtful, and perhaps very curious about the man in the little cabin. Jed began to think of the unseen presence not just as a gift giver, but as a silent, watchful neighbor. The soft thumps and rustles at night had become a familiar part of Jed's world. He often found himself listening for them, a quiet smile on his face. He knew his unseen neighbor was out there, moving through the trees with a quiet grace despite its size. But knowing and seeing were two different things. One misty morning, after a night of particularly heavy rain, Jed decided to check the stream behind his cabin. The ground near the water's edge would be soft and muddy, perfect for seeing what animals had passed through. He often looked for deer tracks or the paw prints of a curious fox. As he got closer to the stream, his eyes scanned the wet earth. He saw the usual marks, a rabbit's hop, a squirrel's small prints. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. There, pressed deep into the mud, was a footprint. It was enormous. Jed knelt down, his hand hovering over the print. It was easily twice the size of his own foot, maybe even bigger. The shape was clearly human-like, with a heel and 5 distinct toes, but the sheer size of it was astounding. It was much, much too large for any man Jed had ever known. And it was definitely not a bear paw, which would be rounder and show claws. This was a foot, a giant foot. He looked around frantically. There was another print a few feet away, then another, leading away from the stream and disappearing into the thicker woods. They were spaced far apart, telling Jed that whatever made them took very long strides. The weight pressed into the mud was incredible. These prints were deeper than any he'd ever seen. Jed stood up, his heart pounding a rhythm against his ribs. The mystery of the gifts, the strange sounds at night, the broken branches, it all clicked into place with the sight of these massive tracks. He had read stories, heard whispers from old-timers in town about creatures in the deep woods, but he had always thought they were just tales. Now, standing by the stream, staring at the undeniable evidence in the mud, Jed knew. He knew that his unseen friend, his silent gift-giver, was something truly extraordinary, something legendary. He knew who was watching him. Standing by the stream, the huge footprint still fresh in his mind, Jed felt all the strange happenings click into place like pieces of a puzzle. The little wooden bird, the carefully woven basket of berries, the smooth, pretty stone, and the useful bone tool. These were no random acts. They showed thought, skill, and even kindness. Then there were the sounds, the heavy thumps at night, too big for a deer or a bear, but careful and quiet. The rustles near his cabin, as if something large was pausing to listen. And those rhythmic knocks, almost like a secret message tapped on the cabin wall. These sounds always came from something big, but also something intelligent, something that moved with purpose. And now, the footprints. Enormous, human-like, undeniable tracks in the soft mud. They were much bigger than any man's feet, bigger than any animal's paw. They belonged to a creature of great size and weight, yet one that had moved with a certain stealth. Jed walked back to his cabin, his mind racing. He sat by his fire, looking at the carved bird on his mantel. It all added up. The mystery creature was big, smart, and kind. What else could it be? He thought of the old stories, the tales whispered around campfires, the legends of the deep woods. Bigfoot. The word formed in his mind, not with a jolt of terror, but with a quiet sense of understanding. It made sense of everything. The broken branches that looked snapped with great strength, the rock piles that showed a touch of order, the thoughtful gifts, the heavy but silent steps, and now the giant prints. It wasn't just some animal or a strange person. It was a creature from the old stories, a gentle giant living hidden in the forest. Jed leaned back, a small smile spreading across his face. Bigfoot was living in his woods, perhaps even near his cabin. And this Bigfoot was leaving him gifts. The idea was wild, unbelievable, but it felt right. He wasn't just alone in nature anymore. He was sharing it with a legend. The realization that Bigfoot was his mysterious neighbor filled Jed with a new kind of calm. It wasn't a monster. It was a gentle giant. He started thinking about all the old stories he'd heard as a boy, sitting around campfires with his grandpa. Stories about a large, hairy creature that lived deep in the wild places. Most of those stories painted Bigfoot as shy. People said it rarely showed itself, always keeping hidden, moving through the forest like a ghost. That fit with how Jed's gifts appeared and disappeared, and how the sounds were always careful and quiet. Bigfoot didn't want to be seen, but some of the tales also spoke of Bigfoot being friendly, especially with people who showed respect for the woods. Jed remembered one story about a lost hunter who left out food, and the next day found his way marked by strangely broken branches, leading him safely home. Another tale told of a family whose crops were protected from bears by an unseen forest guardian. These stories, once just fun campfire tales, now felt real and important. They helped Jed understand his own experience. The gifts weren't just random acts. They were gestures of connection, of friendship. The carved bird, the berries, the bone tool. These were not only kind, but also showed a certain trust. Jed thought about how he had always treated the forest with care. He never took more than he needed, always cleaned up after himself, and respected the animals and plants. Maybe Bigfoot, his unseen neighbor, had noticed that. Maybe that's why it felt safe enough to leave gifts for him. The old stories gave Jed comfort. They told him that Bigfoot wasn't dangerous or mean. It was a creature of the forest, a part of the wild, just like the bears and the deer, but with a special kind of wisdom and a gentle heart. He felt a deep respect for this hidden being and a stronger desire to continue their silent friendship. He knew he had to be careful, to respect its shyness, but also to show his own kind heart in return. With the old stories in his mind and a warm feeling in his heart, Jed decided to make his silent friendship with Bigfoot a regular thing. He wanted to show his appreciation more often, not just as a one-time thank you. So, he started leaving out small, simple gifts more frequently, placing them carefully on the same mossy stone or near his porch. He spent his walks through the forest with a new purpose, always looking for something that might interest his big friend. He knew Bigfoot lived close to nature, so Jed looked for natural treasures that still held a unique charm. He found a handful of smooth, river-worn pebbles, each one a different shade of gray and brown, feeling soft and cool in his hand. He arranged them neatly on the stone one evening before bed. Another time, he came across a piece of wood that had been shaped by the wind and water into a strange, twisted form, almost like a tiny animal or a dancing figure. It wasn't something he would carve, but nature had carved it beautifully. He thought Bigfoot might appreciate the artistry of the forest itself. He left it leaning against the base of a tree closest to his cabin. Sometimes it was just a particularly bright and perfect feather he found, or a cluster of dried wild berries from his own garden, knowing Bigfoot enjoyed the sweet taste. He even left out a small, hollowed-out gourd he had found, thinking it might be a useful scoop or container. Jed never saw Bigfoot take the gifts. Each morning, they would simply be gone, replaced by a new, equally thoughtful present from the forest. This quiet exchange became a comforting rhythm in Jed's life. It was a secret game, a wordless conversation that made his solitary cabin feel less lonely and the vast woods feel more welcoming. He wasn't trying to force an encounter, just nurture the bond, respecting the shyness he knew was a big part of his extraordinary neighbor. The quiet exchange of gifts between Jed and his unseen neighbor grew into a beautiful routine. Jed would leave his simple offerings, and by morning they would be gone, replaced by something new and wonderful. What Jed noticed over time was how the gifts from Bigfoot began to change. They weren't just general forest treasures anymore. They started to feel more personal, as if Bigfoot was learning about Jed's likes and needs. One chilly morning, Jed found a small bundle of wild herbs tied neatly with a piece of vine. He recognized them instantly: mint and something else, a leafy plant known to make a soothing tea. Jed loved a good cup of herbal tea, especially on cold days. He had often gathered such plants himself, but this bundle was perfectly picked and prepared. It was a clear sign that Bigfoot had been watching him, noticing his habits. Another time, Jed woke to find a small, perfect pile of huckleberries on his porch. These weren't just any berries. They were the ripest, sweetest kind, found only in certain sun-dappled spots deep in the forest. Jed had a special fondness for huckleberries, a taste he rarely got to enjoy. He felt a blush of warmth spread through him. Bigfoot knew. He also received unique types of edible mushrooms, carefully chosen and placed, never anything poisonous. Once, a small, perfectly dry piece of kindling wood appeared just when Jed was running low. These gifts weren't just beautiful. They were useful, thoughtful, and deeply personal. They showed an understanding that went beyond simple curiosity. Jed would often talk out loud as he placed his own gifts, telling the empty forest about his day, about what he was working on, or how much he enjoyed the last gift. He wondered if Bigfoot listened, if it understood his words. The increasing thoughtfulness of the gifts made him believe that it did in its own way. This silent, secret friendship was growing, built on respect, kindness, and the shared language of the forest. Jed felt a connection unlike any he had ever known, a deep bond with the wild heart of the woods. The gifts from Bigfoot, now so personal and thoughtful, did more than just fill Jed's cabin with interesting items. They filled his heart with a feeling he hadn't known before. He had always enjoyed being alone in the woods, finding peace in the quiet. But there's a difference between choosing to be alone and truly feeling solitary. With Bigfoot, that feeling of being solitary slowly melted away. Jed now felt a deep, unspoken connection to this unseen friend. It was a bond built on silent exchanges, on the understanding that someone else, something extraordinary, cared enough to leave him a bundle of herbs for his tea or a handful of his favorite berries. He would often sit by his window, looking out into the dense trees, and imagine his big, furry neighbor moving quietly through the shadows. He'd smile, knowing they were both out there, living their lives, but also sharing a secret world. The woods, which he loved so much, now felt even more alive. Every rustle of leaves, every distant thump, held a new meaning. He felt like he was part of something bigger, a silent conversation with the ancient spirit of the forest itself. He wasn't just a man in a cabin anymore. He was a friend to a legend. Before, if Jed had a good day, catching a big fish or finding a rare wildflower, he had no one to share it with. Now, in a way, he did. He'd tell the forest about it, knowing his words might carry to his listening friend. And when Bigfoot left a perfectly crafted gift, it felt like a silent cheer, a shared joy. He still loved his peace and quiet, but now it was a different kind of quiet. A quiet that held the promise of connection, of gentle presence. he felt less alone in the woods than he ever had, knowing that a kind, watchful friend was always near, sharing his secluded patch of the world. This friendship, though never spoken or seen face to face, was one of the most real and comforting things in Jed's life. The years had brought a comforting rhythm to Jed's life, a silent dance of gifts and gentle understanding with his forest friend. He had never seen Bigfoot, not truly, and had long ago stopped trying to force a meeting, respecting its shy nature. But one snowy morning, that quiet routine was gently broken. Winter had draped the forest in a thick blanket of white. Jed was outside, chopping wood for his fire, the crisp air nipping at his nose. He worked steadily, his axe making satisfying thuds against the logs. As he paused to wipe his brow, he glanced towards the thick stand of pines that bordered his clearing, a place where he often heard the soft night thumps. And there it was, peeking from behind the wide trunk of the largest pine, a dark, furry shape. It was tall, much taller than any man, and covered in thick, shaggy fur that seemed to blend with the shadows of the tree. Jed only saw it for a split second. A flash of dark brown, a large, curious eye that seemed to meet his own from a distance. It was just a glimpse, a quick, shy peek. Then, as fast as it appeared, the shape pulled back, melting into the deeper shadows of the snow-covered trees. It was gone. Jed stood frozen, his axe still in his hand, his breath catching in his throat. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with an incredible rush of excitement and wonder. He hadn't imagined it. He had seen it. A tall, furry creature, his unseen friend, finally showing a tiny part of itself. He waited, listening. The forest was silent again, save for the gentle whisper of the wind through the snowy branches. There were no sounds of hasty retreat, no breaking twigs, just quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. Jed lowered his axe, a wide smile slowly spreading across his face. He hadn't needed to see it to believe, but seeing it, even just for a moment, made his heart swell. It was a confirmation, a quiet hello, a shared secret between two friends. He knew, without a doubt, that he had just seen Bigfoot. After the brief glimpse, Jed simply knew. There was no doubt in his mind, no question in his heart. That tall, furry shape, the curious eye, the way it vanished so quickly. It could only have been Bigfoot. The stories, the footprints, the gifts, the sounds in the night, all of it made perfect sense now, wrapped up in that one fleeting moment. A powerful rush of feelings swept over him. It wasn't fear, not even a tiny bit. Instead, it was pure excitement, like finding a hidden treasure or solving a grand puzzle. His quiet forest world held an even deeper magic than he had ever imagined. He had spent years dreaming of living in harmony with nature, and now he was, in the most amazing way possible, sharing it with a creature of legend. Along with the excitement came a profound sense of respect. Bigfoot had chosen to stay hidden for so long, to only show itself for a brief second. It was a sign of its wisdom, its understanding of the delicate balance between their worlds. Jed respected its shyness, its wildness, and its silent ways. He felt honored that Bigfoot had shown him even that tiny part of itself. He went back to chopping wood, but his movements were lighter, his spirit brighter. The simple task felt joyful. He glanced at the pine tree again, a silent message of thanks passing from his heart to the deep woods. He wouldn't try to follow it or search for it. He would continue to live his life, respect its space, and cherish the silent friendship they shared. Knowing Bigfoot was real, and that it was his friend, made the world feel bigger and more wonderful. It changed how Jed saw everything, from the smallest leaf to the tallest tree. He was part of a secret, a beautiful understanding that only he and his furry neighbor knew. It was a bond that needed no words, only kindness and respect. The brief, exciting glimpse of Bigfoot made Jed's heart feel even closer to his forest friend. He knew Bigfoot was shy, but now that he had seen it, even for a moment, he felt a stronger urge to communicate, not just through gifts, but with his voice. So Jed started talking out loud to Bigfoot. He knew it might not understand every word, but he hoped it would understand the kindness in his tone, the friendly sound of his voice. When he walked out to leave a gift, he wouldn't just place it silently. He'd stand there looking towards the tree line and speak. "Hello there, my friend," he'd say, his voice soft and clear. "I hope you like this. It's a shiny rock I found near the river." He'd talk about his day, about the weather, or about a pretty bird he'd seen. It felt a little strange at first, talking to what seemed like empty woods, but soon it became natural. Most of all, he made sure to thank Bigfoot for its gifts. When he found a new bundle of herbs or a special kind of berry, he would hold it up and say, "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for these. These are just what I needed. You are so kind." He wanted Bigfoot to know how much he appreciated every thoughtful item. Sometimes, after he spoke, he thought he heard a very soft rustle in the trees, a little deeper in the woods than usual, or a gentle thump that wasn't quite a branch falling. It was never a clear answer, but it was enough to make Jed believe that Bigfoot was listening, that his words were being heard, even if not fully understood. This new way of talking made their friendship feel even more real. It was no longer just a one-sided conversation of gifts. It was a deeper connection. Jed felt like he was truly sharing his life with Bigfoot, even across the invisible line of shyness that kept them from meeting face to face. He was speaking from his heart, and he hoped his giant friend felt it. Jed's spoken words to the forest, along with his gifts, deepened the bond between him and Bigfoot. Over time, the gifts from his unseen friend became more than just kind gestures. They became messages. Jed, with his keen eye for nature and his growing understanding of Bigfoot's ways, slowly began to read these silent messages. He noticed patterns. If a certain type of smooth, dark river stone appeared on his porch, it often meant that rain was coming soon. Sure enough, within a day or two, the skies would open up. Jed started relying on these stone forecasts, often preparing his cabin for a downpour, thanks to Bigfoot's warning. Another example was a specific kind of light, strong wood. If Jed found a piece of this wood, perfectly stripped of its bark and placed near his fishing gear, it almost always meant that the fish were biting well in the river. He'd grab his rod and usually have a very successful day, thanks to his secret fishing guide. If a rare, bright red mushroom, a kind that grew only after a long, dry spell, was left, it was a sign that the forest was healthy and full of life after a drought. It was like Bigfoot was telling him, all is well. Jed learned that a specific cluster of pine needles meant a cold snap was on its way, urging him to gather more firewood. A perfectly ripe, sweet berry, left alone on his porch, meant that a particular fruit patch was ready for picking. These weren't just gifts. They were pieces of forest wisdom, shared by a creature deeply connected to the land. It was a language without words, a conversation woven from leaves, stones, and berries. Jed felt an even greater sense of awe and respect for Bigfoot's deep knowledge of the forest and its subtle ways. Their friendship wasn't just about kindness anymore. It was about a shared understanding, a silent way of talking that made Jed feel truly at home in his wild surroundings. He was learning from Bigfoot, becoming even more attuned to the rhythms of nature. The silent language of gifts and Jed's spoken words made his life in the woods rich and full. He had his routines, his connection to nature, and his extraordinary, unseen friend. But even in the deepest wilderness, sickness can find you. One cold, damp morning, Jed woke up feeling terrible. His head ached, his throat was sore, and his body felt heavy and weak. He had a bad cold, worse than any he'd had in years. Getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. He tried to light his fire, but his hands trembled, and he quickly grew tired. He spent the next few days huddled under his blankets, trying to keep warm. He couldn't go out to gather firewood or fish in the river. His small supply of food dwindled quickly. The simple tasks of daily life became huge challenges. He felt feverish and dizzy, and a cough shook his whole body. In his sickness, the quiet of the cabin, which he usually loved, now felt heavy and lonely. He missed the sounds of the forest, but mostly, he missed the unspoken presence of his friend. He couldn't leave out a gift, couldn't speak his usual greetings. He felt cut off, isolated in his weakness. He tried to make some of the herbal tea Bigfoot had left him before, but even that felt like too much effort. He just lay there, shivering under his blankets, feeling smaller and more vulnerable than he had in a very long time. The thought of being so far from anyone, with no one to help, made a cold knot of loneliness twist in his stomach. He was truly alone, and it was a scary feeling when he was so unwell. He closed his eyes, hoping to sleep away the sickness, but worry kept him awake. Jed spent another restless night, shivering and coughing, the loneliness weighing heavily on his feverish mind. He drifted in and out of sleep, dreaming of warmth and comfort, and the quiet presence of his forest friend. When he finally woke again, the morning light was peeking through his window, soft and gray. He still felt weak, but something felt different. He slowly pushed himself up, leaning on his elbow. A faint, earthy smell mixed with something sweet and green reached his nose. It wasn't the usual smell of his cabin. With effort, he swung his legs over the side of the bed and shuffled to the door. Pulling it open, Jed gasped softly. There, right on his porch, were two new gifts. One was a small bundle of plants, carefully gathered and tied. Jed recognized them immediately. It was a special kind of root and some bright green leaves, known in the old ways to help fight off bad colds and fevers. He had looked for this plant before, but rarely found it. This was powerful medicine from the forest itself. Beside the healing plants lay something else, a large, warm, and wonderfully soft animal hide. It was thick and supple, clearly cleaned and prepared with great care. It wasn't rough or stiff. It was perfectly soft, ready to be draped over a cold body. Jed reached out a trembling hand and touched it. The fur was incredibly soft, radiating a gentle warmth that seemed to chase away some of the chill in the air. Tears welled in Jed's eyes. Bigfoot had known. It had known he was sick, known he was alone and weak. And it had brought him help, comfort, and warmth when he needed it most. This wasn't just a thoughtful gift. It was an act of profound care, of true friendship. He wasn't alone after all. His giant, shy friend had been watching and had come to his aid. Jed felt a warmth spread through his chest, stronger than any fever. He was deeply, truly cared for. The sight of the healing plants and the warm hide on his porch filled Jed with an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. He carefully brought the gifts inside, his hands still a little shaky from weakness. He brewed a strong tea from the special roots and leaves, sipping it slowly by his rekindled fire. The warmth spread through him, and with it, a profound feeling of being deeply cared for. He wrapped the soft animal hide around himself, pulling it close. It smelled of pine and fresh earth, a comforting scent of the forest. He closed his eyes, no longer feeling the chilling grip of loneliness. Bigfoot had not just left him gifts. It had provided comfort and medicine when he was most vulnerable. It was a sign of a true friend, one who watched over him, even when he couldn't ask for help. Jed realized that Bigfoot wasn't just a neighbor anymore, or a silent exchange partner. Bigfoot was his guardian, his protector in the deep woods. It knew when he was well, and it knew when he was sick. It understood his needs without a single word being spoken. This knowledge settled deep in Jed's heart, chasing away any lingering fear he might have had about the unknown. He thought back to the old stories of Bigfoot being friendly, of protecting those who respected the wilderness. Now, he was living one of those stories. Bigfoot was looking out for him, making sure he was safe and well in his secluded cabin. It was an extraordinary bond, far beyond anything he could have ever imagined when he first built his home. As the days passed and Jed slowly got better, he kept the hide wrapped around him, feeling its warmth and remembering the kindness behind it. He would glance towards the forest, a silent message of thanks passing from his heart to his unseen friend. He knew he was truly blessed to have such a powerful, gentle, and caring presence watching over him in his wild home. He was never truly alone. After Jed recovered from his cold, feeling the deep warmth of Bigfoot's care, their unique friendship settled into a steady, comforting rhythm. Years began to pass in the deep woods, marked by the changing seasons and the continuous exchange of gifts. Jed would leave his polished stones or dried fruit, and by morning, a new treasure would appear, a perfectly smooth piece of driftwood, a special cluster of medicinal herbs, or a rare, vibrant feather. Jed never tried to force another sighting. He knew Bigfoot was shy, and the brief glimpse he had was enough to confirm its existence and its gentle spirit. He respected its need for privacy, understanding that their bond didn't require face-to-face meetings. Their connection was deeper than words or direct encounters. It was woven into the fabric of the forest itself. He continued to talk out loud as he left his gifts, sharing his day, his thoughts, his thanks. He imagined Bigfoot listening from the shadows, its large, intelligent eyes watching, its big heart understanding. He felt its presence in the quiet moments, in the rustle of leaves that was just a little too deliberate, in the soft thumps at the edge of the clearing. They had found a way to be friends, two different beings sharing the same wild world. It was a secret friendship, known only to them and the ancient trees. Jed knew that if he ever told anyone, they might not believe him. Or worse, they might try to find Bigfoot, which was the last thing he wanted. So the secret remained, a precious treasure in his solitary life. He grew older in his cabin, his hair turning gray, his steps a little slower. But his spirit remained bright, always warmed by the thought of his watchful, caring friend. They never truly met face to face again, not in a way that Jed could clearly see and greet. But their hearts knew each other, and that was all that mattered. Over the many seasons Jed lived in his small cabin, it changed from just a house in the woods into a warm, peaceful home, unlike any other. It was filled, not just with his own simple things, but with the unique treasures from his giant, furry neighbor. Every shelf, every corner, held a piece of their quiet friendship. The carved wooden bird still sat on his mantel, a reminder of the very first gift. Beside it were the smooth, gray stones, some with swirling patterns, others just perfectly rounded. Dried bundles of wild herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a fresh, earthy scent. Gifts for tea or for healing, always left with care. A small collection of interesting pieces of wood, shaped by wind and river, stood in a corner, each one a silent story of the forest's art. The beautiful, unique flowers, like the purple one that first answered his own gift, were carefully pressed and kept in an old book. Even the sturdy bone tool, now softened by use, had its place near his workbench. These weren't just objects. They were memories, symbols of a friendship that grew stronger with each passing year. Jed would often sit by his fire, looking around his cozy cabin, and feel a deep sense of peace. Each item, small or large, told him that he was not alone, that he was cared for, and that he was part of something truly special in the heart of the wilderness. His cabin became a place where the human world and the wild world touched, quietly and gently. It was a testament to kindness, to understanding, and to the extraordinary possibility of friendship found in the most unexpected places. It was more than a home. It was a sanctuary, filled with the warmth of an unseen hand and the wisdom of the ancient forest. Every gift was a whisper of peace, making his cabin the most cherished place on earth for Jed. Jed lived out his days in the cabin he had built, a man deeply content and at peace. The walls of his home were adorned with the silent stories of his extraordinary friendship. Each carved bird, every polished stone, every dried herb, and the soft animal hide were not just beautiful things. They were lessons learned and cherished memories. Through his years in the wilderness, Jed came to understand something very important. True friendship isn't always about shared words or seeing someone face to face. It's about kindness, respect, and a deep understanding that grows between two beings, no matter how different they are. He had found this truth in the most unexpected place, in the heart of the wild forest, with a creature from old legends. Bigfoot, his shy giant friend, had taught him that the world held more wonders than most people ever imagined. It showed him that intelligence and compassion weren't just found in humans, but in the hidden corners of nature, in beings that moved silently and offered gifts from the heart. Jed often thought about how lucky he was. He had sought a quiet life alone, and instead, he had found a profound connection that made his life richer than he could have ever dreamed. His friendship with Bigfoot was a secret, a treasure he held close, never needing to tell anyone else to make it real. He continued his quiet exchanges until his very last days, always leaving a small gift, always whispering his thanks to the trees. He knew Bigfoot was out there, watching over him, just as he cherished the thought of his gentle friend. Jed's life was a testament that friendship knows no bounds, no species, and no expectations, only the simple, powerful act of caring. And sometimes, the most magical friends are the ones who leave you gifts and remain unseen, guarding your peace from the shadows of the forest.